to Mr. Carlos Martin. Carlos is representing BlueFloat. Carlos is one of the pioneers in floating wind globally. He had engaged in the Wind Atlantic project, if I know well, it was one of the first projects who had attracted project finance. So, Carlos, the floor is yours. And okay.
Thank you very much, Panos. And first of all, I would like to thank the Hellenic Wind Association for this very good event and for inviting us and congratulating the association for the work they are doing in promoting offshore wind in Greece. I would also like to thank my fellow speakers for the very good presentations. I would like to subscribe all the messages they passed, and I would like to add some based on our experience in floating wind. Let me start by introducing who we are. BlueFloat Energy is a relatively young company, but with significant experience in offshore wind, and namely in floating offshore wind. We are a global developer of offshore wind farms with the vision of accelerating the deployment of offshore wind, as we believe these technologies are going to be a key enabler for the energy transition in multiple geographies. We don't think this is a niche play or niche technology. It's a major technology. We want to achieve zero net economies across the globe. And with that vision, our mission is to develop new offshore wind capacity in multiple geographies by bringing our offshore expertise to different countries and partnering with local players who can bring their local project development expertise. Today, we are already present in 6 markets, actively looking at entering new geographies across 4 different geographies. We are headquartered in Spain, and we are part of the portfolio of companies of 547 Energy, a private equity fund manager from the US who has already a solid track record in Greece, having, in partnership with Enteca, participated and successfully secured capacity in the latest onshore wind auctions in Greece. I think it's important to highlight that floating wind within the offshore wind industry is a special technology. Of course, it allows quite a number of benefits, addressing new areas, like in Greece, with deeper waters beyond 40 meters, placing the turbines further offshore, reducing, as a consequence, the visual impact. But beyond that, those benefits, from BlueFloat, we have a strong belief that floating wind is not just a variant of offshore wind, of fixed offshore wind. It's really a new type of technologies with a completely different profile that requires specific expertise in this floating space. And that's actually what we can bring from BlueFloat, very much reflecting on what Arno commented before. Experience in floating offshore wind is particularly relevant to successfully develop new capacity. In our case, the core of BlueFloat team was previously at EDP Renewables, in charge of developing floating wind, and namely in charge of developing the project you can see on the screen, which is BlueFloat Atlantic. I was actually personally the project director within that project, and helped bringing the project from a concept, a white piece of paper, into final investment decision. And the team that is today with BlueFloat help also the implementing the project and turning it into a reality. We're also bringing experts from other floating spaces, and we constitute what today is probably one of the most experienced teams in floating wind. BlueFloat Atlantic was planned to be the first floating project in the world. It eventually became the second after HWEA Scotland from Equinor, but it was the first of its kind in many different aspects. It was at that time using the largest turbine ever mounted in a floating structure, the V164. It was the first semi-submersible commercial wind farm, first in Portugal, actually in continental Europe. First to use a 66 kV cable, and the list can be pretty long, but the most important achievement in my view of this project was to secure project financing. And we talked a lot, we heard about financing and bankability in previous discussions, and we can only highlight the importance of ensuring bankability of offshore wind projects, because that's the only way that large developments can happen. The virtue of this WindFloat Atlantic project was to be able to secure a project financing for the first time for floating technology. And I think it's recognized by the industry as a turning point in that regard, that made it very clear to the whole industry that floating wind was here to stay and was here to become a commercial technology. Some of the challenges we had to face at WindFloat Atlantic are probably common to a new market like Greece. When we started the project, there was no regulation for offshore wind in Portugal. There was no tariff system planned for offshore wind, and had to be developed. We also had to go through a number of hurdles or to a number of steps to make this project a reality. This was the first project in Europe to be approved under the new state aid process that had been approved by the European Union back in 2014, if I'm not mistaken. And we also had to attract investors and financial institutions to this project, as bankability, as I was commenting, was one of the main objectives of the project. We also had to deal with the uncertainty that the project posed for many local stakeholders. And I talk about fishermen. I think that's a very important industry to be very much involved from day one, but other stakeholders, local tourist companies, neighbors, and so on and so forth, had to be heavily involved in the project to turn it into a reality. And last but not least, mobilizing the forces of the country in terms of universities, research centers, but especially manufacturing, was also key to success. And I need to say that it was also an opportunity to position the country as a key part of a European value chain. So based on this learning and what we have also learned from other countries where we are developing wind farms, there's some takeaways that, or key success factors that I think is important to highlight. And some of them, I might repeat what my colleagues commented, but I think the voice of experience is quite relevant in these cases. From our modest point of view, in order to develop successfully an offshore wind industry in a country like Greece, there's a number of factors that need to be taken into account. The first one is to set credible but ambitious long-term goals to give visibility to developers and industrials. Having this long-term visibility is key to mobilize investments, heavy investments which are required in this industry, and to attract the attention from international players and also financial institutions. That is absolutely critical, but it's important not to forget about what's in the mid-term, because if you only have a long-term goal, most likely things will not develop. So in parallel to these long-term goals, we believe it's important to define some intermediate mid-size projects. And when I say mid-size, I want to highlight that offshore wind has a big scale. Mid-size for us is 200, 300 megawatt developments that can justify already investments, that can justify a reduction in the costs compared to just prototypes, which we believe at this stage are no longer needed because there's already a good experience in the market with different technologies. So filling the gap with these mid-size, again, 200, 300 megawatt projects is also very critical to define a roadmap to develop offshore wind, floating offshore wind. Then I think it's important to leverage the EU. The EU is a major driver for the success of offshore wind. And there's quite a number of levers that can be used here. I'm just highlighting here a few of them. There's definitely very important financing mechanism that can be leveraged for offshore wind. The next generation, the Green Recovery Plan from the EU, is definitely one of them. And we are actively participating in turning next generation a driver for offshore wind in other geographies. The Innovation Fund, the EIB, which was critical for WindFloat Atlantic, is also now getting more and more familiar with floating wind. Wind Europe, the European Association, can be very, very helpful in this, in sharing experiences, sharing best practices in regulation, and so on and so forth. The list could be pretty long, and this is just a few examples. We talk about regulation. That goes without saying. Regulation needs to be in place and needs to be sufficiently flexible and stable to provide a good support for development. Flexible to allow for adjusting any development to the latest innovations in the industry. Floating wind is evolving very fast with bigger and bigger floaters, improved designs, and so on and so forth. So having some flexibility within the requirements of environmental assessment and other licenses is very important. So what the so-called envelope consenting is a very good tool to define which are the boundaries that need to be approved, and within those boundaries having flexibility. And then the security of regulation is very important, and there's of course need to have the possibility for any stakeholder to participate and to claim if needed, but this needs to be well defined under which circumstances and to which extent and in which timings this needs to happen. Couple of last points. I think we are strong believers of the collaboration between international players like us with local players. I think the only way that any offshore wind development can happen is by combining global expertise with local knowledge. I think the work conducted, for example, by the association is very important in ensuring this collaboration between these two types of players. And these collaborations should also allow for involving early on the local industry in these very good opportunities so that the offshore wind developments can leverage the existing forces, assets, capabilities in the industry in order to maximize the chances of success. But at the same time, turn this into an opportunity for the country so that the support for this type of developments grows every day and guarantees the sustainability of this industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. We'll have the opportunity to have some questions afterwards. Now I will